Okay, welcome everyone on this special evening, the 26th of November. And today is the day that would have been Simon Nkoli's birthday. And that's what we celebrate today on this Simon Nkoli Remembrance. And I have two very special guests to introduce to you in a minute. And the first guest that I'm happy to introduce is Subo Geyer, all the way from South Africa. He is co-lyricist of Nkoli, a Vogue opera, and he performs in it as well. He will give an introduction about Nkoli and about the Vogue opera itself. But first, we're gonna watch a trailer to see what the whole Vogue opera is actually all about. Here we go.
You strike a drag queen, you strike a rock.
Welcome, 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 welcome to the most grandiose of balls.
We're here! We're here! We're here!
Dance along, vogue along, tens, tens, tens across the board when the category is face your adversity.
And now you bring the spin, the sky thing. This be fierce. Be fierce. Lu, ta, ko, ti, lu, lu, ta, continua. Young lions, Yamazani, Yasoke, Babas, Pete, Komani. Fai, teto, gavulu, many.
So, the category is defiance and you better work.
We will not stand in the same dock. We will demand that he is not on the witness stand. We will walk with our heels, walk but naked. We don't care if you think we're noisy, we're angry, serving lipstick in the face of our enemies. You will see us as we are fierce. The days are coming of today. Respect for just rights. Lesbians are coming out. Oh, baby, we're hot and cold. I have AIDS. Sassy Fanny,
Sassy Fee, Ebonyame,
Sassy Steve,
Blah. So give us some tips, serve us some silver, blow and let the world know that Simon lives. Simon, Nkoli.
With us this evening. Welcome. We cannot
Let
see
me turn
yet.
on my camera.
Yes,
Surprise.
there he is. Okay.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Sabo. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's all give a warm welcome to Sabo. The floor is
Yay.
yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much to everyone from your guys' platform, as well as everyone who's present right now. I wish I could see all your faces. I'm sure you're beautiful. But no, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for taking the time to actually see and learn more. Okay, you're beautiful. You're beautiful. You're definitely beautiful. Thank you. No, thank you for taking the time to find out more about Simon Nkoli, find out more about South African queer culture and how rich it is in its tapestry and the ways in which that we're looking to expand it through this project. So I can't thank you enough for the platform and for the opportunity. Um, there's no better place to start by actually speaking about the man himself, Simon Nkoli, who was a revolutionary in his time, who is classified solely as a LGBTQIA plus activist, but actually was more than that, was an anti-apartheid activist who was part of the Dahmer's treason trial. So Dahmer's treason trial was a trial that put away young people who were fighting against the apartheid regime back in the 1980s, 1985 to be specific. And Simon was at the forefront of that. And if you know any bit of Simon, you know how much of a queen he was. His energy is still here somewhere. And he took that energy and he was himself even in those spaces, in spaces where he was still fighting for South African freedom, but he didn't shy away from who he was. And so he used his own political will, he used his own social will, he used his own understanding of self in order to create a new framework of what it is to be African and to be Black. He famously said, I am Black and I am gay. There's no primary or secondary struggle. There shall all be one struggle, which that's a strong thing to say when you think about it, because in a climate like that in the 1990s, of course, that was in the lead up to the first gay march in Africa. Things were very much separated according to the lines of race. And so any dissociation with race could almost be seen as a betrayal of the broader struggle. But he understood the importance of intersectionality in that regard, to be able to say that I can speak about my sexuality, I can speak about my race, the same way you can speak about your sex and you can speak about your race, and any other aspect of things and bring it together. And so that's who Simon Nkoli was, someone who was very steadfast in their principles, in their application towards carving the kind of South Africa that we have today. A South Africa where, unlike my contemporaries in Uganda, who are constantly facing means oppression, Nigeria, the list goes on and on. I have the luxury to be the queen that I am today because of people like Simon Nkoli, because of people like Beverly Detsy, and so that's the man that we looked to tell the story about. But of course, the story in of itself was never going to be a story of true uh, gravitas if it wasn't layered. Simon was a very complex human being. Simon was someone who was equally considerate, but also equally selfish. He was a very conceited individual who loved himself for good reason. And in a space like that, I always say, as a queer person, I'm always telling myself that, girl, you are the sugar honey iced tea, and that's shit. I'm the shit. You know why? Because nobody's telling you that as a Black queer person. So I understand why he had to be that way. Why he had to prop himself up and enjoy himself for the way that he was. But also there were intersectional issues that didn't sit well with Simon. Issues, for instance, with regards to feminism and the queer struggle. Simon never truly got the grasp of understanding what it was and why it was important that championing lesbian rights was of equal measure as championing gay rights. And those are the kind of things that we don't shy away when we worked on Simon Nkoli, the Vogue opera. We look to tell a story of a holistic person because his shortcomings are still important for us today, because those shortcomings are shortcomings that are still prominent within our community. And so it's important for us not to try create a saint out of Simon, but to create a human out of Simon. Because ultimately, the biggest problem with how society sees queer bodies, LGBTQIA plus bodies, is that we are seen as sexual beings. We're not seen as human beings. And so that's what we look to do with with Nkoli the Vogue Opera. We humanize a figure that did amazing things, but is equally flawed, and take those flaws and use them as a means to create a story that is going to live in the contemporary and tell the story that will be able to live throughout time in order to teach young Black queer kids, young queer kids of every generation, of every race, about what it is to be perseverant, what it is to be principled, and what it is to be a beautiful queer man. And having taken that, the first thing that we needed to do, of course, was then create this Vogue opera. I didn't start it, so luckily I was recruited by Welcome Nishiba, who had been working with Philip Miller. Philip Miller is the creator of the Nkoli Vogue opera. He brought me in as a co-lyricist because of my rapping abilities. Yes, believe it or not, I am a rapper myself. So he was able to take my skill and say, girl, I know you be rapping on like hip hop beats. Come rap on these classical beats for a second. I'm like, girl, what are you talking about? How can I do that? And he was like, nah, don't worry about it. Just have fun, and let's extrapolate his story. And so the process of making Nkoli Vogue opera started the year before I joined in 2019, in which Philip came together with the producer Harriet Perlman, Welcome Nishiba, the researcher at the time, and a few others. And they had a forum that included Bev Ditsi, who is a prominent and equally prolific LGBTQIA plus activist in our country and icon. And of course, Simon Nkoli's mother, who since departed us and departed the world last year. And he was able to extrapolate so much information about Simon's story. Did the same thing with Simon's best friends, Dina Malindi, to be able to get a holistic story and a holistic understanding of who Simon was. I then joined, and we then started to work on the lyricism of it all, mixing up the classical with the hip hop, mixing the spoken word with prose, with the standard script writing, in order to create this multifaceted product that we have today, a production that includes different forms of multimedia, that brings in so many young Black South African queer artists together, and also brings the biggest and the best operatic singers of our time into one, such as Anne Masina, to tell this beautiful story of Simon Nkoli, tell this beautiful story of how Simon Nkoli came to be in a very queer way. We took the Vogue culture popularized in the New York dance scene and underground scene that has since, of course, permeated all over the world. Y'all know people who are be Vogue. You know when them girls, yeah, that's Vogue. So we took all of that and we put it into one. Crazy, right? Yeah, but we're gay. Of course, we're a little bit crazy. You gotta be a little bit crazy to make these kind of things, you know? So having taken all of that and put it onto one, we were able to create this monster of a project that's able to speak towards different mediums in a way that is organic, in a way that is authentic and true to queer culture, as much as we add our own spice. And so having worked with all these different people and having engaged in such visceral and strong ways, we're then able to take it on the road, firstly to the Market Theatre. And having performed on it myself at the beginning, I thought, okay, maybe let me take a step back and enjoy it as a writer. And since then, Niza J has come in as the MC. The MC is a very beautiful role, who is essentially the guide, the narrator that takes us through time. And Niza does such a great and amazing job of doing that. Added great costume design with the likes of Mr. Olafit, Sigelela Nomvete, who is a burgeoning, stunning creative from South Africa, all queer, by the way, coming together to make this happen. And having done all of this now, our goals are to take it all over the world. We just did another 10-run show at the Baxter Theatre in Cape Town to 10 sold out shows. It was really dope. Means a lot of people wanting it. The girls are asking me, girl, don't you got a ticket? I'm like, girl, I ain't got a ticket for you. Why didn't you buy it in time? And that's what we hope will be the case when we take it all over the world. We look to achieve something that is going to go beyond just the means of entertainment. We are very, very intentional in our endeavor to create a work that is didactic, that teaches and also entertains. And so we're looking to now get it all over the world to tell the story of this wonderful man who was beautifully flawed, but most importantly, beautifully human. And so it's a pleasure to be able to even be here in this moment, to know that Simon's legacy lives beyond even our art. It lives beyond anything that anyone could ever even fathom at that time and to what it is right now. It's so lovely to see that the Simon Nkoli Remembrance Day, all so far away from our country, in a country whereby he's still a stranger to some, but that's the importance of the work that we're looking to do. We're looking to change all of that. We're looking to move away from queer erasure. We're looking to make it very clear to people that what is important here is to tell stories that are organic and are authentic to us as Black queer people, and understand that our existence doesn't come as a result of colonial imposition or even colonial validation, that queer bodies exist outside of any form of validation, that our existence is valid irrespective of whether people choose to see our humanity or not, because it is a choice. And that's what we're hoping to teach with Simon Nkoli the Vogue Opera. Teach people to not see queer people not just as a sex, but as humans, human beings who have so much more to offer than what meets the eye, even though what meets the eye can be quite a slight. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll come to Amsterdam one day. You'll love it.
Thank you so much, Subo, for adding this valuable perspective. I wish you could, I don't know if you heard our audience, but we were all laughing and really enjoying your talk. So we would love to welcome you someday here in Amsterdam. And it's good to hear that Simon Nkoli is still inspiring people in South Africa and also here in the Netherlands. And thank you for, making that connection between the past and between now. And having said that, thank you for your presence. You're welcome to watch the entire lecture online. And if you have any questions afterwards, please just make some noise
I'll
and
shout, I'll shout and
shout.
scream.
We will make sure that your voice will not be unnoticed.
Sure.
So thank you, Sabo, once again. Woo! Having said that, now it's time to introduce our second special guest of this evening. And that's Bart Luirink, who is, been here quite often at the Zuid-Afrikahuis. He is editor of ZAM magazine, and he's also co-author of the book Homosexuality in Africa, Disturbing Love. For the people who want to buy that book, you can afterwards. We have it right here on display. So feel free to do so. Um, and I think I've said everything I have to say about Bart, so let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, good evening. It's quite a challenge, I think, to get over what's been said already. Thank you for the invitation to talk, to shine a light this evening for Simon and on Simon. On his birthday, he would have turned 67 today if he would still be here with us. And it's his birthday, but also many other days in the year that bring back memories to Simon. So many memories, actually. How I met him. I'll come back to that later on for the first time. How I heard about him for the first time. How we met at the first Gay and Lesbian Pride March in Johannesburg in October 1990. how I listened to him while he spoke to the audience and made this great statement on how you cannot disconnect the fact that you're black, that you're gay, and that liberation should include everybody. How we fell in love and how we separated at some stage, but managed to turn that relationship into a friendship that lasted up to his final moments. How he took me to his workplace in Soweto, the Township AIDS Project, where he worked as a communicator and HIV and AIDS prevention. How he took me to his mother in Sebokeng in the Vaal region, south of Johannesburg. Uh, how he introduced me to all kinds of people in a bar in Hillbrow. I started to live in South Africa in '93, and that became a bit of my second home. Sometimes, some weeks I was more there than at home. Actually, um, how we watched the finale of the Rugby World Cup. I think it was in 1994. Supporting the South African team, Simon in his female Umkhonto we Sizwe guerrilla outfit, and then after the victory, all going onto the streets. How he showed me and taught me actually learns of political activism in a very, very difficult kind of situation with an apartheid South Africa still lasting in the early 90s and still with homophobic laws, etc., 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 etc. So many memories that I cherish about Simon and that cross my mind once in a while. I see a picture of him. We have this beautiful, beautiful opera that was put together or created by Philip Miller with so many others. Uh, when I watch the Simon Nkoli biannual lecture at the university in Johannesburg, or see a picture of what is called the Simon Nkoli Corner in Hillbrow. There was no street available when after he had passed away, so they named corner after him. A theater play that was once made about his life, um, and so many other things that remind me of Simon. And of course, this beautiful portrait that was made by Kadir van Lohuis in the early 90s when we worked together in Johannesburg. Simon was, when I first met him, a bit smaller than I expected him to be, but was in another way, it was a big man actually, a very charismatic person, very cheerful. Uh, and it was in 1989. He was only out of prison for 6, 7, 8 months. He was arrested in, I think, in 1985, as Boo spoke about already, as part of a group of political activists in the Vaal region who were arrested because they were in the vicinity of an incident. They did not take part in that particular killing that happened there, but under the laws of the state of emergency, one could be felt guilty or sentenced to prison because of being there. And Simon was one of those people, together with in South Africa famous names like Popo Molefe, who later became a prime minister in one of the provinces, and Terror Lakota or Moshua Lakota. Terror comes from his reputation as a soccer player on Robben Island when he was arrested. Kina Malindi, that's who also mentioned already, and they were all arrested in 1985 and in awaiting trial for years and years. I think Simon was in prison for about 4 years. And finally, when they didn't get all the evidence together, they couldn't find him guilty, and he was the only one who was actually released. The next picture that we can show is a newspaper clipping from a Dutch newspaper, Trouw magazine. This is Simon here together with one of the family members of one of the accused there. They were accused, they were sentenced to long sentences in prison. Of course, it didn't last that long because in 1990, with all the changes happening in South Africa, they were released. And it was called the Delmas trial. I think it was the last big political trial, show trial in South Africa. I was told about Simon already in 1985 at a conference here in Amsterdam. It was a conference that was exploring the connection between apartheid in South Africa and racism in the Netherlands, and how apartheid was rooted in European racism. There's lots of discussion about it, but that was the theme of the conference. And at that conference, a woman from what was then called the Lesbian Archives came to me. That was in the northern part of our country, in Leeuwarden. And she asked me, "Have you heard of Simon Nkoli?" And she told me about that trial, and she told me about that group of political prisoners. And she explained to me that within circles of international LGBTIQ plus movements, it was known that Simon was a gay man. And it created some kind of mixed feelings, because at one hand you feel sorry, of course, for people being arrested and all the misery they go through. And at the other hand, I felt a sense of sensation also, because here there was this gay man who was part of a group of political anti-apartheid activists, who was known as a gay man, not in that particular group at the time, I'll come back to that, but in his student organization, he was a student activist, and in his family and internationally. And it was already in 85 first modest campaign starting internationally to send cards to Simon and letters, and there was also some financial support from the Dutch chapter of the so-called International Defense and Aid Fund, support that went to his mother. And I felt that sense of sensation, because liberation movements and movements that fight for independence in Latin America, in Africa, elsewhere in the world, there's a kind of tradition of having a hierarchy in that struggle. You put liberation, freedom first, and if people raise other issues like women's rights or rights for LGBTIQ plus people, then leadership would say, no, that's not a priority at the moment. We must first liberate our people, and then we will come back to that. And many of them, of course, thinking we will never come back to that. But that was what they were saying, and that happened in almost all countries where brave liberation movements also build a reputation that's not that wonderful if it comes to these kind of issues. So I had this gut feeling that with Simon Nkoli being part of that group of political prisoners and an out gay man, at least in a number of circles, that could maybe help to encourage a different kind of development within the liberation movements, within the ANC and other democratic organizations that were fighting against apartheid. And that's what actually happened. So so that's how I got to know about Simon Nkoli in 1985, and then in 1989 he was out of prison, as I said, for a couple of months. He attended a conference in Sweden from the International Lesbian and Gay Association, and I got a phone call from two friends of mine, Dutch guys who attended that particular conference, and they said, "We've been to Sweden and we met Simon Nkoli and we invited him for a short break to the Netherlands on his way to the UK for another visit, and do you want to meet him?" So of course, so he came to the office of the anti-apartheid movement here in Amsterdam, and we sat together for hours. And I clearly remember him entering our offices screaming in a way. I mean, when I listened to the speaker before, I had this memory of Simon a bit, and sitting at this green table that was full of things that we put there with knives, like Viva ANC and Release Mandela and all those kind of things. And we were sitting here with a number of colleagues and listening to his stories about his imprisonment, which strangely there was no sign, and I wouldn't know what kind of sign could have been there, but there was no sign of him having been in prison for 4 years. Uh, um, of course, later on there was, with all this cheerfulness and all this talking and bringing and going through all kinds of developments, also about the prison years. One for a moment had the feeling that there were no mental scars or physical scars. Later, I, I, I had to find out that they were really there. But he somehow, uh, I don't know, I don't think he overcame these kind of experiences, but he, in a way, managed to deal with him, maybe also in his new role. When he was in prison, uh, uh, just before he got into prison, he was a member, he had become a member of what was then called the Gay Association of South Africa, which was an exclusively white gay men's organization. He was the first black person to become a member. When he got arrested, uh, before he got arrested, it was already I mean, he attended some parties of them. What he told us in 1989 was what struck him was that at those parties everybody wanted to be with him on a picture. And later on, it turned out that this organization that was a member of that International Gay and Lesbian Association, they were confronted with with the trial against him, with his arrest. They were confronted with the policies of apartheid. They were asked, "How do you feel about it? Do you take a stand against apartheid?" And then they showed those kind of pictures. Look at us. Here we are. We have one black member, and he's one of us. But when they had, Simon told us, when they had an outie to the Johannesburg Zoo at some stage, they realized only at the entrance of the zoo that he was not allowed in. So they asked him to wait outside until they kept back. When he was in prison, they refused to take a stand against apartheid and also to stand in solidarity with Simon. So that's why they were eventually kicked out of that International Lesbian and Gay Association. And it motivated him very much to start his own organization, or a new organization, after his release, which became the Gay and Lesbian Organization of the Witwatersrand. The Witwatersrand is the area, so Johannesburg and the neighboring areas are called GLOW. There were white members, but there were predominantly black members. It was a kind of, who told us about it already, it was kind of male dominated. Later, I think it was more balanced, but in the beginning, that it was a bit of an issue. I recall that. So GLOW, his ideas of what the organization could do, where it could find support, what he envisaged, and so these were all items that were discussed at that table at the anti-apartheid movement in 1989. And another thing that came up was that there had also been another incident, I think, in 1988, if I remember correctly, when two representatives of the ANC gave an interview to a British gay magazine. I think it was Gay Times, but I might be wrong there. And they were asked about their stand on this particular issue. Ruth Mompati, who was a well-known ANC leader, and Solly Smith, who was also an ANC leader, who later turned out to be an informer for the apartheid regime. And they said, well, we don't have a stand on this particular issue. We don't think that it's important at the moment. We don't look at minorities. It's time that the majority in South Africa is now will now get in charge. And when the interviewer asked, how would you feel about gay groups or gay organizations fighting for those particular rights. Then they said, well, we don't have groups for flower sellers, so why should we have groups for gay and lesbian people? So it created a bit of a storm internationally, also in anti-apartheid movements. I remember coming to the office and my colleagues looking at me and said, "Did you hear about that interview? And are you offended by it?" And I laughed it a bit away and said, "Well, it's a stupid interview, and let's see how the official leadership of the ANC responded." And to our relief, after a couple of months, the international secretary of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, at the time he wrote a letter to that same magazine, uh, distancing himself from those statements. There's lots to say about that particular statement because he said what people do at their homes, that's up to the people themselves. It's their private business. Of course, it's a more complicated issue. It's not only about what you do at your home, but still, it was a good statement, I think. So we spoke about that, and we spoke about the impact it had also on activists in South Africa. Simon mentioned all kinds of other people that he came across that I later got to know. Paul Mugetti, an activist in Johannesburg who later became a pastor in the LGBTIQ plus church in Johannesburg. Edwin Cameron, of course, who later, a lawyer who later became a member of the Constitutional Court in South Africa. Zaki Ahmad, who has played an enormously important role in the movement to get a treatment against HIV to the people. And so many, Beverly Ditsey, of course. And so many people I slowly got familiar with. We used to say when we met friends and comrades from South Africa in the 80s, coming from London or from Lusaka, where the ANC headquarters were based, or from other parts of the world, there was this traditional phrase of saying goodbye. It was, "We'll see each other in 5 years' time in Johannesburg." So that's why what we also said to Simon when he left our offices in '89, not knowing what there was a sense of changes in the air, but it was we did not expect it to happen that soon. But of course, after 6 months or so, there was this announcement of the release of Mandela, the unbanning of the ANC, the moratorium on the death penalty, the unbanning of other organizations, the return of the people in exile, etc., etc. So the whole process of change started in 1990, and I went to visit South Africa for the first time in October 1990. My colleagues at the anti-apartheid movement didn't believe me that I had planned it in such a way that I would arrive a day before the first gay and lesbian pride march. But it was really coincidence. Um, and so I arrived on Friday, and on Saturday I went to Braamfontein, which is an area close to town, where we all gathered, few hundred people, 200, 300 maybe, lots of young people with brown bags over their heads, so they were not showing their faces. And then we listened to the speeches, this wonderful speech by Simon Nkoli, and also there was also a reverend who announced that he was now leaving the NG Kerk, which was a white conservative church, and Beverly speaking there, and Edwin Cameron and others. And then we marched through Hillbrow, a neighboring area, to a park where we all came together again, and I think the number of people had grown from a 200 or 300 that we started with up to 1,000 or 1,500 people who had taken off their paper bags from their faces, and I clearly remember that from the balconies in Hillbrow there were lots of black domestic workers who were working for white families there, who were screaming and waving to the people that marched. I'm not sure if everybody understood what the marches was all about, but people probably thought it's a march, so it must be good. Um, And so it was the beginning. It was the beginning of a tradition of annual gay and lesbian pride marches, but it was also the beginning of a process that finally led to, of course, one of the most important developments in this LGBTIQ plus history in South Africa, the adoption of a freedom of sexual orientation clause in the South African Constitution. Uh, First, I think in 1994, when the ANC and the National Party, which was then still the governing party, had agreed upon a transitional constitution. It already included that freedom of sexual orientation clause, but after 2 years there was a new draft of the constitution, almost similar to the transitional constitution, and it still had that same clause, and it was adopted with a vast majority. Not only the ANC, but it was also adopted by the National Party, by what was then called the Democratic Party, and even in Kata, I think the so-called Zulu Party, and that was a result of campaigning, of those marches, of the leadership role that Simon and Beverly and Edwin and Paul and all the others played. It was a result from the lobby that was organized. There was some money and some bank account that was put there once when the apartheid regime threatened to make stricter homophobic laws, and so they number of pretty well-to-do white people put money together, put it in a bank account. If it comes to that, we have money to hire lawyers and to fight. I think it never came to that. So somebody at some stage discovered that secret fund that was still there. And with that fund, a lobbyist could be paid who went from party to party and discussed all the things. So it was a combination of these mass mobilizing. So also Cape Town gay and lesbian pride marches. There were public meetings, etc., etc. Uh, and this lobbying that did its work. But the most important thing, and I think that now I come to the essence of what I want to say, is that we must credit for this Simon Nkoli and a number of black anti-apartheid activists, black activists who were part and parcel of that broader liberation movement. It hasn't been imported by others. It's there are quite a number of people who claim the success of the South African LGBTIQ movement, and many factors contributed, of course. Peter Tatchell, UK activist. Well, if you read some of his pieces, then you get the wrong impression that he was actually the one who convinced the ANC of doing that. I've also come across interviews by South African activists, kind of exaggerating the role of international solidarity movements. Of course, we had discussions, as I was a member of the anti-apartheid movement at some stage, when ANC representatives were visiting. You had the feeling they started themselves about that particular subject because they knew if we don't bring it up, then they might bring it up or so. But of course, it was up to them to discuss it. So we did a bit, but I think what the main factor that made the ANC choose a new and revolutionary position if it comes to the LGBTIQ plus rights and equal rights, that is because of the role of people that people played in the ANC and in that broader movement. And I've got a very convincing example of that. When Simon died in November 1998, on the 30th of November, just a few days after his birthday, he had been to Amsterdam. Uh, uh, in 1994, he attended the Gay Games, I think in San Francisco or somewhere in the United States. And when he came back, he said to me, "Okay, I made it. He was diagnosed with HIV and AIDS, or with HIV. And it's been announced that the next Gay Games will be in Amsterdam in '98, and I'll make that too. I'll be there. So I said, okay, fine. And he did. He was weak. We noticed that his health was deteriorating. I think a couple of weeks before he went to Amsterdam, he was tested, and I think there was one T cell left in his body. You need at least 400 to have good resistance. But he made it. He came back to South Africa, and soon after his return, he got sick. And we were living in the same building, and I saw him almost on a daily basis. I could see how sick he got and also how tired he was. At some stage, he said, "I'm too tired to fight any longer." So I think he accepted what was going to happen. And it happened on the 30th of November. A week after that, there was a commemoration of Simon in the Anglican Church in Johannesburg. There were many speakers there. And one of the speakers was Moshua Lekota, Terra Lekota, one of the group he was arrested with, who was in 1998 a minister, I think Minister of Defense in Mandela's government. And he recalled those prison years. And he confirmed what Simon had told me and a number of other people, and also had told in interviews, that they had very serious discussions in prison amongst the prisoners about the issue of homosexuality. At some stage, one of the people in that group said, "That's not in line with our values. Homosexuality is a Western thing. We don't accept that. We envisage a South Africa without that. It's non-existent in our culture." And then Simon said, "But what about me?" So that was the moment he came out to his fellow comrades in prison, and it created an enormous discussion and huge tensions within that group. At some stage, it was proposed to kick him out of the group. At some stage, he himself thought, "Let me not be part of that group any longer," up to the moment that the lawyers actually interfered. George Wiesos, who was once Nelson Mandela's lawyer, was also the lawyer for this group of political prisoners. And he said, "If you let Simon down, you can continue, but without me." So they had an agreement, or they decided to agree to disagree, or whatever you want to call it. Now, Moshe Lokota, he recalls that particular incident at the commemoration in 1998, almost as I did just now, confirmed that there was this big debate and how it made him and some of his comrades think. And then he said, when 1990 happened and Mandela was released and the ANC unbanned, and we were preparing for negotiations, and the official negotiations actually started only at the end of 1991. And when we entered the negotiation room, I was thinking by myself, Lakota said, should we now let down our gay and lesbian comrades who fought with us? Are we only securing liberation for ourselves, for straight people, or are we including everybody? So you see the impact of that debate that took place behind bars in this group, and how it later on spread through the ANC. Because people like Lakota, but also others, and I've stayed quite a number of times at the cottage where Simon was living in the beginning of the 90s, and it was in the garden of a cottage, small cottage in the garden of Kina Malindi, who was his cellmate in prison. And a, 2 or 3 times, I think 2 times, when we got home in the evening, we went through the big house because Simon had to ask something at Kina or his wife or somebody else and so. And then Popo was there and Lakota was there and some of the other people were there and they were preparing for some heavy stuff the next day. They were all in this mood of changing and negotiations and doing things and etc., and drinking wine and walking into that room with the suits that they had to wear the next day, and there was this and recollecting memories of those prison years. And sometimes they also made jokes about gay this and gay that, and Simon made jokes and whatever. So what you already noted there, that it had been an issue, but that they had somehow come to terms with it. And some of them, Kina Malindi, for instance, never had any problem with it from the beginning, but some others did in that particular group. And what it shows is an ability of people to change their minds. And I think you need somebody like Simon and his fellow activists, of course, to uh, to get it out of the closet, to make it alive, to make it come to life. You need somebody who has the courage to bring it up and to take a stand and to come out of the closet also. So, uh, and it somehow reminds me of what Mandela said about racism. I mean, it's not something you're born with, it's something that you get taught. So you can uneducate yourself, you can get rid of it. And I think one of the beautiful things with all the problems that are still there, the economical problems and all kinds of other problems, and uh, the challenges South Africa faces, and if it comes to the LGBTIQ plus issue, of course there's the beautiful laws. It's not only the constitution. It was one of the, after the Netherlands, one of the second or the third or the fourth country who legalized marriage, same-sex marriages. It legalized adoption by gay and lesbian couples, etc., etc., etc. And but of course, on the ground, how people feel, the prejudices are still there. I hope, I guess it's getting less. If you look at research being done, you can see that actually, but it's there. And there's hate crime against black lesbian women, and there are lots of problems, of course. But there is a starting point for everybody who wants to create an equal society, and that is what Simon Nkoli fought for. That's his legacy. Thank you.
Yeah, almost pictures to show. Sorry about that. I can show some more pictures. This is
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry. Let me just quickly explain.
Hey, what do you want to?
You can come up with is it
The HIV/AIDS prevention poster. This is Simon here. This is Glossy. This is the one Peter that looked after Simon with the other Peter when he was very sick. And I know who he is, but I don't recall his name. And that was produced by the Township AIDS Project, TAP. That's the organization that Simon would. Oh yeah, that it reminds me of an anecdote I wanted to tell you. That when my first visit to South Africa, Simon phoned me and said, can you please bring 2 black dildos?" And so okay, and, I mean, I picked up the visa from the embassy, and the then ambassador took the opportunity to meet me. He was pretending as if it was difficult to give me a visa and whatever, but he just wanted to talk to me or whatever. And then I could see on his desk there was this big file with my name on it. So when Simon asked me to bring two black dildos, which he needed for the Township AIDS project, he went to the mines and to all kinds of to schools showing people how to use a condom. I thought, okay, they're in my suitcase, and then I arrive at John Smuts Airport, as it was, and I pass customs, and then they will open my suit, etc., etc. Next picture. Yeah, this is the commemoration poster that was produced shortly after he passed away. Also with the support of ILGA, the International Lesbian and Gay Association. Next one. This is from his funeral. Well, yeah, image speaks for itself. Digging the grave, activists are there. And then next one. Yeah, this is mentioning Ati Patriruka, which is a South African Eastern Cape artist. Uh, he created what he called a proposal for a Simon Nkoli monument. That's this one. And it was exhibited in Zuid-Afrikahuis, which is the big modern art museum, African modern art museum in Cape Town in 2017. It never worked out, as far as I know. And then I think
That was the last one.
we are there. Yeah. Okay.
Are there questions from people in the room? Yeah. Sorry, Bart, you just keep. It's okay. Questions.
All clear. All clear.
I have a microphone. No, they were Another question.
Bill, you want to know about the dildo? Where I bought it. I did bring them. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, maybe also not a really relevant question, but I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
Were there no ARVs for him to take and save his life?
Yeah, he took ARVs.
Okay.
Of course, it was very difficult to get them in South Africa at the time, so they were somewhat smuggled into the country. And we, with a group of friends, we put together money because it was very expensive at the time.
Yes.
So that he could use them. But my guess is he was serious in taking them. He took them into it was in those years you had to take them at a particular time and don't play with that. And he really did that. But I guess it was too late. And he had been very, very sick 2 or maybe even 3 times before that we actually feared that he's not going to make it. So sadly, I think it was too late for the medicines to do their work.
I do have a question. I think I love the way you told the story about the experience of changing one's mind that came about because one of the things when you were describing it's a very macho kind of culture, the basically liberation movements.
Mhm.
We know that from what happened in the camps and here. So it is a macho culture. So it was a great story about how this one person was able to change one mind and which had quite huge policy implications. It wasn't him singly. There were, as you said, Judge Cameron and all of the other people from the anti-apartheid movement. But I think my question then is right now, what's happening both in Europe and in South Africa, erosion of rights and a strong polarization. I just recently went to a friend's movie around the specific thing in Europe. She's a product of the Bosnian War, coming here after the fall of Yugoslavia, and her fear is that exactly the same thing is happening in Europe that happened in Yugoslavia.
Yep.
After the death of Tito. And I feel in South Africa, similar kind, and in Africa, similar erosion of rights. What can we learn? I mean, recognizing what you said, that us here cannot tell people back home and there's movements happening there. But what can we learn from this specific way that he was able to really influence? Uh,
That's a very difficult question. Um, and of course, and that's one of the big challenges, I suppose, is that when in countries, governments and leaderships are not prepared to encourage developments into a more progressive direction, it makes it all the more difficult. Of course, in South Africa, there was an agreement, uh, whatever one thinks about it, but an agreement between different parties that we had to overcome this system of apartheid and make a transition into democracy. And there was also somehow an agreement that it should include LGBTIQ people. And it was also one of the factors I think that also contributed is that churches, and especially white conservative churches who had been so instrumental in keeping that system of apartheid going, were so uh, uh, experienced such a backlash with all the changes that they didn't organize a lobby to get to go against it. So these were factors. But today, coming back to your question, um, the one thing, and it's a bit of an easy answer, is to dig up as many stories and experiences as possible that are there that could give people indications of how to change things and why it is useful not to give up. Um, if I may make, if you listen to Simon's statement at the first Gay and Lesbian Pride March, I can't be free as a black man if I'm not free as a gay man, and the other way around. Uh, of course, it's a perfect example of what we today call intersectionality. Um, we didn't know it, or at least we didn't use that word in those days. And I kind of doubt, I would be curious to hear Simon about this, because I feel he made that statement and he was very much convinced of the value of that statement. But I also noticed many times how easily he got people into organizations, into campaigns that might differ on certain issues, but that agreed upon, okay, we need to fight for a constitution that guarantees equal rights for gay and lesbian people. But they might carry a history of supporting or not speaking out against apartheid as he experienced himself. But he also managed to somehow, I don't want to use the word reconcile, but I think he felt it's useful if they also join these kind of things. And today, I think we too easily put everything together rather than allowing people to enter a struggle which they agree and get to know about other things. So I don't know, but yeah.
Something what you did, as I remember, Simon, yeah, you started saying activist, and I would say also a self-made man versus intellectually. Remember when he was in Amsterdam 1980 with the Human Rights Conference, here the Gay Games, there were colleagues from South Africa. Um, my mind have my name. Treatment Action Campaign, Saki. He came to me and he tried to prevent that Simon had a prominent position there because he said, "Oh, that Simon, he just come with paper clips, actionism. What the hell is that?" And really,
Mm.
and so that aspect in his life versus those others, some others with a certain kind of elite. Um, yeah. So he was really that. I saw him as such a unique self-made man, as
Mm.
he just is going his own way, and he didn't care so much about it.
And he enjoyed life. And there was
And he
this,
enjoyed life,
this
yeah.
joie de vivre. And I think I admire Zaki Ahmad for the many things he did. But Zaki envied Simon when it comes to this attitude, because that's something he is not very able to. I say, oh my God, this is on YouTube. But I love really, 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 really. But there was always a bit of this tension I noticed, and it had to do with Simon so easily mingling with other people and becoming part of. I mean, he was very political. He was very much of an activist, and also at some times, and even when he was sick, he said, "Okay, I will behave in many ways, but I will also not. I won't give up enjoying life." Uh, and I think that's maybe something we also shouldn't forget.
Yeah. We have another question from our special guest, Sabo. Yeah, there he is.
Right. Screen.
There he is again.
Age at the time. But what do you think made him different from everybody else?
Um, Thank you. Yep. For one, his experiences, I suppose. I mean, he came out as a gay man at quite a young age and was confronted with all this resistance in his family. A mother sent him first to a traditional healer and then to another traditional healer where he was forced to drink urine. And then when it didn't solve the problem, then he was taken to a white psychiatrist who happened to be gay, but the mother didn't know that. So it's these experiences that I think harden you and that makes you. I also remember when he was diagnosed with HIV. That was in '93 after he had adopted tuberculosis. It was actually diagnosed long before, but in prison they had tested him and they said you're HIV, but he didn't believe them because they're intimidating me. But he was. So in '93 it was confirmed, and then he said to me, "I'm not going to tell. I'm not coming out yet in this matter because it will. I will face so many difficulties, and of course it was an issue. Insurance and all those kind of things, and the house he was renting, and one could get into trouble. Um, but a couple of weeks later, he did come out. And somebody asked him, and a journalist, and then he came out, and then we probably felt, okay, we must go for it. So there was this fighting mood that was built uh, by experiences, I think. And the other thing is that I noted that a couple of times, um, I think he was also very much aware that the story that he had to tell was an important story, and that gave him strength. I've noticed in interviews where I had interview with international journalists, and then I joined after a while because I wanted to pick him up and go home or whatever, and then uh, I noticed how he actually, well, I don't want to use the word enjoy because I mean sometimes they were very difficult and stories of hardship, but he was so convinced of the need to tell that story and to make it known to other people. And that conviction made him to the one he was, I think.
Thank you much. I've got one last follow-up, if I'm allowed. Is what do you like? He comes across and he came across as someone who was very, very fearless, but he was human. What if you are at liberty to share? What do you, in your time with him, did you find his greatest fears were, and how did you, if you ever got a chance to overcome them, and if so, how do you think you went about that?
Um, he had a tendency, and that is something, though I don't want to compare my own history with his one. I mean, that in no way, but I do recognize a tendency not to show too much of your fears. I think that was one thing with him. Getting to know him better, I spoke about it earlier on. I mean, there were mental scar and physical scars from those prison years. And I think at some moments uh, I noticed that uh, that created some fear in him. That could is that at some stage those physical scars. Uh, well, he got rid of them, or somehow they got cured, or whatever. Uh, uh, but still, the mental thing was there. Having been in prison and also being let down by your own comrades. Not all of them. Kina Malindi, whom he shared a prison cell, he was very supportive, and some others in that group as well. But that must be a very, very, very difficult thing if you're fighting for the same cause, and then there's this thing that's very much about you, about your existence, about your being, and then being let down. I've heard stories also from ANC people, not from all kinds of people, but somebody was on prison on Robben Island. Sorry, it's just an anecdote to make it clear that where at towards the end of the 80s, so shortly before things really started to change, the prisoners had a right to uh, select one movie they could watch all together. And then this one ANC prisoner said, I want to see that, what's it called, that Brazilian movie about those two guys in prison. One is a drag queen and the other one is Argentina. Or Argentina is a straight guy. I forgot the title. Yeah. So they hire that, or they ask for that video, and then they watch it all together in that room, and then after 10 minutes or so somebody stands up and said, comrades, this is antisocial. We must stop this video. And then after a while somebody else supports it, and somebody else and else, and then they all leave the room. And then my friend who told me this, he stayed. So I want to see this movie. And he was left alone there. So I think that is something to be very scared. But again, Simon was not eager to say too much about it, and of course things changed for the better later on. But still,
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Sabo, for your question. We have one last question. Bart, if you just, yeah, sorry. Almost there. We have one last question from Peter Duplessis. Unfortunately, he could not be here because he was ill today. But I want to give a special shout out to Peter. Peter, if you're because he has been get well soon from all of us. Oh, can you? But he has been more or less the creative brain behind all this. And he also has two questions. I'm going to read them right now. He is wondering if there was any attention at the time for trans people.
no.
No.
Very short.
Okay.
I there were some trans members of the gay and lesbian organization of the Witwatersrand. I've known a number of them. And they were a part of the organization. It was not an issue. But it was not politicized. It was the acronym of LGBTIQ. It was not known. It was first what the slides here. It said gay pride in Johannesburg. That was the first title. It was changed before that first march in gay and lesbian pride, and there was a discussion that it should be lesbian and gay pride, etc., etc. But the BTIQ plus was that entered the movement at a later stage.
Thank you. Last question from Peter is he's also curious, was it more harsh to do LGBT activism in the area of Johannesburg as opposed to Cape Town? Was there a network between activists like Simon in Johannesburg with those in the south?
Yeah, there were networks of sort, and of course, at some stage, the so-called National Coalition for Gay and Lesbian Equality was formed, which had an office in Johannesburg, actually close to where I was living. And that connected all the regional or provincial, whatever, LGBTIQ plus organizations. And also at ILGA conferences, of course, people from those different organizations met. But there was always a bit of an Amsterdam, Rotterdam kind of tension between Cape Town and Johannesburg. And I think quite a number of the Johannesburg people, a lot of people in Cape Town, they're very serious. They're very serious. They're always having debates and want to put together documents and resolutions. And there's some truth in that, I suppose. But yeah, those networks existed.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you all for joining on this very interesting interactive lecture. Thank you, Bart. Thank you, Sabo. And let's go. Hi, hi. And let's go have a drink. The drinks are ready. And this is for Bart. So thank you.
Thank you, Sabo. You're on the big screen now.